Hello, you're listening to an excerpt from the Cynical Optimist podcast, which you can find on all your favourite podcasting apps. Make sure to also hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss any of our videos. Enjoy this discussion.
So, this episode is going to be going up on Monday the 23rd of November 2020, if you're listening really far in the future. So, today is the 57th anniversary of the first episode of Doctor Who. And even seeing it as 57 made me feel a bit old, because I remember the 50th quite clearly.
Yeah.
It's very strange to think that we're closing in on 60 years. But throughout the show's been back 15 years for its modern run, in quotes, since 2005. So, whilst we have covered Doctor Who on this show before, we haven't actually done it for about 4 years. We did an episode in our very first season called Doctor What, back when we just gave episodes really weird names.
Back when we sounded like this.
Actually, we do sound a bit different, but like we're 20, so we don't sound like that. I think we've just got more
19. Thank you very much, Phill.
I think actually in the little bit I was listening to, I said I'm 20 and you went, oh, I'm still 19. And I was like,
yeah.
Now
that was when age was an advantage.
Yeah, now I'm like, I'm 25 and you're like, haha, I'm 24. You're just like bragging to me, I'm still early 20s, you're mid 20s.
Yeah. Age at some point just flips and becomes no longer an advantage, does it?
And I'm the wrong side of that line all of a sudden. I blinked and now I want to be 20 again.
What makes me feel old as well is that I've just rewatched all the David Tennant stuff, and I can't believe he regenerated 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's absolute madness, isn't it?
That is madness.
So, yeah, it came back in... Well, the thing is, we talked a bit about the older eras in those episodes, but since we can't really remember what we talked about back then, we're just going to go over the three modern eras. So you've got Russell T, you've got Stephen Moffat, and you've got Chris Chibnall, and then spend a bit of time posing what could be the 60th anniversary, what might be a fun 60 years, considering obviously Day of the Doctor was what they did for 50 years. And I still think that's a really good special. Like,
it is, yeah.
Whilst, I mean, we can get into the plot point that is the Time Lords and how they've died, come back, and died again over the course of the last 15 years. But I think overall it was a lot of fun. It was very lighthearted. And actually, after this, I may watch it just because I've been in the mood to watch it. And I think it is on the list in Netflix, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I've what, Day of the Doctor?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, all of them are on there. Apart from I don't think either of the Jodie Whittaker series are on there just yet, but I think the rest is all on there. I thought I'd stop at David Tennant, but I'm actually pushing through into season 5. Well, actually, it's a very smooth transition.
It is.
Actually. It's a very different transition to the Moffat Chibnall era, which is almost a sharp U-turn.
Yes. Well, it's because when he was preparing that season, Stephen Moffat didn't know yet whether David Tennant was staying on.
Yes, that's true. And also you've got Murray Gold, and you've got some of the same writers and directors and stuff, and
yeah,
it's a transition. And I just watched the 11th Hour, the first Matt Smith one, and I one of my favourite trailers to date is the Coming Soon trailer, just after the 11th Hour, where it does the and it's got all those like shots of Churchill and the Daleks, and
it's such a good theme, the 11th Doctor's theme.
It is.
And also Series 5 still follows roughly what had become the standard for Doctor Who seasons in terms of their structure. You had two-parters throughout the series, and you ended with a two-parter. The stakes gradually held. You had something in the background throughout the entire series that eventually bubbled to the surface.
Yeah.
Based on this, do you want to talk about the Russell T era? Because that's going to be what's freshest in your mind. going back to it now, do you still have the same love for it that we had when we last covered Doctor Who on this show 5 years ago?
I'm really glad we're doing this episode because I think opinions and your sort of maturity does change a lot in a certain amount of time, and like the Russell T is like fantastically sort of goosebump sort of enticing stuff where you've got the Murray Gold music, and series 3 is still my favourite. Having done that again, I think it's the most focused. I always remember enjoying season 4, but that is definitely the height of campy Who.
I think maybe that's why I enjoy it so much. There's a certain campy joy to the interactions between the Doctor and Donna, and there's definitely more. They definitely have a bit more of a laid back approach as the cast as well. Like you can tell Tennant's been in it for a while, and they're just kind of having fun with it.
That's very true. I think I'm able to sort of like differentiate because obviously grew up with the Russell T stuff. I think that's what kind of we talk about Moffat a lot in a sort of negative way, and I don't think what Moffat's era was perfect. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But like you go back and watch Russell T's era, and although it's like it's organised, which is nice because you get season arcs and stuff,
and you have like the drip feed of information. You have you could see stuff in the background if you were savvy, or season 4 was less subtle. You just kind of could see Rose on screens, but
yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. And also, like, Russell T's writing, it can be a bit cringy, like, and I know all of them have fallen into that trap at times as well, but, like, one thing I really noticed having rewatched them was how many times they say stuff like, as the old Earth saying goes. It's just like, you don't need to say that every time. You can just say they still say that in the year 5000. They still say it. You don't need to say, oh, do you remember that old Earth song? Or you remember the old Earth saying... it's just, come on, like, you don't need that every time. I've noticed that in a lot of Russell T Davies stuff. I watched a bit of is it Years and Years he did recently, and there's still a bit like that where occasionally he sort of shows his age a bit, and they try and sort of make a kind of a current reference to a Snapchat or something, and I don't know, it just all feels a bit forced sometimes. Some of the episodes are so cheesy. You and I watched Voyage of the Damned when we were able to meet up in person, and
it was when we were doing the planning for this, weren't we? And we just had like quite a bit to drink, and we're just sat watching Voyage of the Damned when your like partner came home. He was like, what are you doing? Like, watching Doctor Who.
And it's the worst. It's down there in some of the worst Doctor Who ever written.
I think, in general, the Christmas specials, outside of a few exceptions, none of them are very good.
Well, they're A for children and B for drunk adults, aren't they?
Like,
because the
whole point of Voyage of the Damned is that you do watch it a bit tipsy after like a Christmas meal. It's just something you can all sit down, watch and enjoy and not think too hard about.
That's exactly it. Because all the adults probably haven't watched the rest of the series, but the Doctor Who Christmas special might be the thing that they watch with their kids, kind of thing, like the one time they watch it. So it can't be related to, it can't really pick up any plot threads. And it's got to be a bit campy, and it's got to be. You basically have to be drunk to enjoy it, but it's not great. And I think some of Russell's stuff isn't great. It borders on the line of cheesy for a lot of it, but the characters are well written at the end of the day.
The thing is, despite the cheesiness, everyone feels very human and very real, and I think it's just he had a real knack for dialogue.
Yeah.
Like, this is how a person would react in this situation.
Yeah, for the most part. Apart from when they say, as the old Earth saying goes.
Yeah. And then when you contrast, obviously, the views of the companion, who obviously isn't used to it, versus the views of the Doctor. And even, like, obviously, withstanding, obviously, the old Earth saying goes... Like, even, like, the people they write in the future aren't too different. And you can kind of believe, okay, this might be what somebody... aside from that, might sound like in the future. Like, people aren't going to change too much. They're just going to evolve with the times a little bit.
Well, I mean, that's it. And Waters of Mars was quite recent in what I watched as well, and that is 2059, and that is incredible. And all the characters just talk how they would today, and it isn't that far in the future now. Especially, it was 10 years ago, but now it's like, yeah, we're actually creeping up on that year, and it's written very well to that. It's not over the top. I like the fact it's called Bowie Base 1, and I could just feasibly recognise everything in that, and I think that's what Doctor Who is. That's why Doctor Who is special sometimes, because it's such a recognisable. Like, all the characters should be recognisable, and all the settings should be recognisable.
It's been a while since I've seen that episode, but that episode's quite dark as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fantastic though. Yeah, the stuff like Midnight, where Russell T really knows how to sort of take the low budget episodes and make something incredible out of it. I like it's his organisation that sort of stands strongest, having just watched it. Like, you have like even though the companions change, I think there's just a very the formatting of each companion really just plays well against the Doctor and David Tennant.
And even where the Doctor is and they're kind of developed, like
yeah,
the new Doctor, like the fresh-faced Doctor, just regenerated with Rose. Then after Rose, having Martha. And then after Martha, needing someone like Donna. Yeah,
where he just wants a mate. And I think like that's a genius move to get Donna in for that series. And yeah, Catherine Tate's just brilliant. And then the heartbreaking sort of The End of Time with Wilf. And I genuinely can't watch that and not cry, like The End of Time Part 2, especially when Wilf's in the graveyard there, and he just sort of like salutes the Doctor and blows him a kiss kind of thing, and he's got the lottery ticket for him and everything. It's just that David Tennant's era wraps up so well, and at the time it's always like it's hard to let go of your Doctor. So I think I remember being annoyed at the time with when Matt Smith comes in, and it's the first. I don't think his first scene is amazing.
What, where he crashes the TARDIS?
Yeah, and he's sort of spitting everywhere and everything. It's like, we've just seen David Tennant go, and then it goes into very...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the only thing about that End of Time Part 2 is that it does seem... The character parade at the end, for some reason, includes like the great ancestor of the woman he had, was interested in when he was a human for a bit. And I was like, was that cameo needed? Although I think as a whole the 10th Doctor's era was very good at quite naturally building his cast of allies, so that at the end of season 4 when they all came back, it felt like a culmination. It didn't feel forced.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it felt very early sort of Infinity War, really, didn't it?
Yes. That was early stage Infinity War.
Yeah.
On your left, Doctor.
Huh? Yeah, it was epic. I remember loving that at the time. But that is the cheesiest season. I think Series 3, which sort of ends on a kind of political thriller, I think that was probably up there for me in the Russell T era. We should speak briefly about Christopher Eccleston as well. Obviously only one series, but again, you can't knock that, because that set the format for these 15 years that we've had since, really, haven't we?
At the end of the day, if that hadn't been good, we wouldn't be sat here right now. It would have been just further proof that Doctor Who didn't, was done. Yeah. If that series had been bad and they just wouldn't have come back. And he does very well. Chris Eccleston does a very good job as kind of this, this Doctor that's obviously been through something. And has a lot of like anger and a lot of like stuff to deal with. And obviously as you go through the different seasons, you get to see all of that. And you get to hear more talked about throughout Eccleston and throughout Tennant. And obviously it all culminates in Day of the Doctor. Yeah. With obviously John Hurt.
Yes, yeah. That's a very nice tie-in, actually, because it sort of resolved the issue that they'd never shown the regeneration between 8 and 9. So it's a very... I thought it was great what they did with that. You got any more sort of passing comments on the Russell T era? Or shall we move on?
I haven't rewatched it in a while. Maybe like you, I need to do a rewatch at some point, maybe over Christmas. I'll watch a few. I was saying to you before, though, I'm tempted to rewatch. Well, I probably will rewatch Day of the Doctor after we finish recording, just because I'm in the mood to watch it, and that's quite light-hearted and quite fun. But as a whole, I remember it quite fondly. I don't think it will hold up. I don't think anything really holds up to when you're just like watching it as a kid. But I do want to throw in, I think I've said this probably in the last time we did this episode, but Doomsday, An Army of Ghosts is like the best two-parter. Like, it's probably not as good as like the season 3 and season 4, but it's still up there. Because as a kid, that cliffhanger at the end of the first part, where the Daleks come out of the sphere, like, I just like, I flipped out as a kid. I was like, my God, it's the Daleks.
I think that was one thing that is amazing about that era, is they managed to keep the big surprises very much under wraps, which is, I know it was easier back then because that was kind of
that's pre-prominent social media. Like, it existed, but it wasn't very big.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas nowadays you can go in and basically find anything. Until now, of course, where it's coming back round to sort of your virtual productions on the Mandalorian and this, that, and the other, where you might not get all the surprises leak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no. Yeah. It was just a very well organised show back then. I think like not having too many story arcs go the whole way through meant it did keep pretty neat. On that note, should we move on to the Moffat era?
Yeah, okay. So, season 5, as we said, follows much the same format as the 4 that followed before, because for one reason, Moffat, when he knew he was taking over, didn't know if David Tennant was going to stay on. And as a result, the whole idea was that if Tennant was staying on, this was definitely going to be his last season kind of deal. Yeah. So the season, in that case, would have gone full circle and actually would have ended with the TARDIS crashing in the back garden. Like, it would have started and ended with that crash, and that would be in the regeneration, and the whole season would have been exploring how he got to that point, kind of thing.
Right. Okay, right.
Which would have been a pretty clever thing, because obviously that means that he wouldn't have met Amy Pond as a child until right at the end.
Yeah.
Which is pretty clever.
Yeah.
And then I think that series as a whole is fine.
I think it was quite interesting how they did I think the one thing, you were right in that it kind of kept mostly the same structure, except they kind of addressed the crack and that story arc like halfway through the season with the Angels episode, which I thought was quite interesting. I do remember that at the time being quite interesting.
Yeah, the crack was definitely more prominent than things than the overarching plot beforehand had been something in the background that may not have played a part until quite late. And then as these seasons go on, like, the overarching plot starts to become more and more prominent to the point where later series even have like an episode in the middle that is the plot episode as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, and they have it in the Angels one, where obviously the crack kind of just turns up in the second half and kind of derails everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's kind of following one thing. And I think last time I watched, I did kind of appreciate the twist that it was kind of like, oh, actually, the crack has turned up and now it's kind of screwing everything over. Like, it's not going to go the way you think, kind of thing. No,
exactly. And yeah, I remember that being really intriguing at the time. But the problem, I think we can address the problem with Moffat's era in one simple question, which was, do you know the origin of the crack?
What now?
Yeah.
Oh my God! The thing is, I'd be recanting like some line of dialogue from some episode in Matt Smith's last episode because it was all wrapped up in one scene.
Yeah.
That was the problem, is that at the end of the season they didn't wrap it up. They said the crack was caused by the TARDIS exploding, but why has the TARDIS exploded? And then that caused the problem.
I think that can sometimes work, because I obviously over the first lockdown I watched all of Avatar: The Last Airbender, which has its own series arcs, but also there's the overarching plot of there's the Fire Lord who exists, and he's the sort of the big bad at the end, and you know what the ultimate goal is, and they obviously plan that well in advance. The problem with Moffat's era of Doctor Who is that he hadn't really discussed with Matt Smith when you're going to leave, how do we wrap this up, and therefore you get... we were saying earlier about how the Doctor Who Christmas special should be understandable while blind drunk, basically.
Yeah.
The problem was Matt Smith's last episode was a Christmas special, and if I tuned into that as an adult with a kid or whatever, I would have no fucking idea what was going on. Because you've got like wooden Cybermen, you've got Trenzalore, and you've got he must utter his name, and you've got the Crack reappearing, and you've got the Time Lords coming back from a time bubble in a time lock, and then you've got
granting him another set of regenerations at the last second. And
then and also
buggering off again.
Yeah, and also way back when the crack was caused by the Silence who wanted to blow up the TARDIS to stop him from getting to Trenzalore in the first place. It's just, it got way too tied up in its own knots.
But it still tried to be a Christmas special, because doesn't it start with like the Doctor showing up at Clara's for dinner, like naked?
Yes. Yeah.
That was weird.
It was. So I think ultimately he was a very good ideas man, and he's probably a nerdier writer than Russell T. Like Russell T was all about the sort of the big reveals and this, that, and the other, whereas Moffat's were a little bit more deep rooted. But
I think possibly a fair comparison would be to say that whilst Moffat may have had better ideas, Russell T was just a better showrunner.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
To be a showrunner is a completely different set of skills. Because I've been listening to the Scrubs podcast. You've never really watched Scrubs, have you?
Not really, no.
But they've had like the showrunner on a few times, and he's talked about obviously like you're not just a writer. Like the head writer is not just a writer. You also work with the producers. You work with the directors. You work with every bit of the team. You go down to set. You watch bits on set. It is so much more of a job than that, and I think Stephen Moffat is far better when he's just a writer in a writer's room.
Well, yeah, I remember during the Russell T era, when you had a Moffat episode, that was the one you kind of looked forward to, because it was always a sort of mid-season, epic, scary episode, wasn't it?
It was one idea done like to its fruition and wrapped all up within either 45 minutes or an hour and a half, and that was it. Yeah.
I think what he had the benefit as well of also he had the stuff in season 4 with River Song where he set up arcs that he presumably at that point he knew he was going to eventually take over as showrunner, so he was able to sort of lay some of his own path in front of him.
Yeah.
Whereas I think we'll talk about that in a minute, but Chibnall's era was basically a start from scratch.
It was a soft reboot, wasn't it? Really.
Yeah, without a lot of transition at all, really.
Yeah, outside of the regeneration scene, there's really not much
that links it.
Yeah, and I mean, a little bit is because by the end of the Moffat era, he was just like, there was that one season where they're like, none of it's going to be interlinked. It's just going to be a series of mini movies or whatever their current thinking was at the time, and then even the eras with Peter Capaldi ended up being quite disconnected from each other. Like they had some interesting stuff in there, but by that point the whole thing had just become such a big shrug as to what was going on. But it just, I think it would have been very difficult to connect it into the next era. But it was because I think, I don't know, Chibnall tried to take it in such a different direction right from the off. It probably did cause a bit of story whiplash to people, didn't it?
Yeah. No, definitely, and I quite liked that initial Chibnall series because it was really a bit. I think it was quite refreshing in some ways because from the Moffat era, getting itself in such a big entanglement with. I don't know. We haven't got enough time to go into the things that frustrate me about
at Holoprojectors. If you want either an episode of this podcast or just a video purely focusing on the opinions of the full Moffat area.
Yeah.
Area.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was quite a breath of fresh air when they sort of did hit the soft reboot button for Jodie Whittaker's series because it untangled all of those knots all of a sudden. But then there is the problem with season 2.
Well, the thing is, the feedback to Chibnall's first season was that they wanted more deep cut lore stuff that obviously Moffat had played into.
Yeah.
But then he just did it, and the thing is, the second Chibnall season starts so well. That 2-part Spyfall episode is so good.
Yeah.
The idea that obviously it ends in like a cliffhanger, and then obviously it's revealed to be the Master, and then you have this like cat and mouse game between the Doctor and the Master throughout history, and you can just imagine that's what 2 Time Lords would do. It's like chase each other,
really cool.
Like try and screw each other over in different time periods, whilst obviously this other stuff's going on. And the stuff at the end, where the Doctor finally goes to Gallifrey, like properly, and then it's all destroyed. And that one scene of the hologram of the Master being like, I went there and I destroyed it all. I just obliterated it all and I killed them all. And just like the Doctor's reaction, that is so well done. And even a lot of the suspense building throughout that season, like the Judoon episode with, for some reason, Captain Jack is just in it for the B plot, and then he is never seen again.
Yeah.
And even the episode just before the finale, which is the haunted house, and it's the ghost, which turns out to be the lone Cybermen, which has been... All that stuff was really good. But then the finale is just it's just pants. It's just,
it really is.
Like, there were so many better directions you could have taken that in, but there's just... I don't know what the inclination is with long-running franchises to say, no, this person who is just this ordinary person thrust into extraordinary circumstances, i.e. the Doctor, arguably Ray. No, they have to be special in some way, otherwise it doesn't make sense. And it takes the specialness away that they have to be special, if you know what I mean.
Totally, yeah, because then you're just sort of relying on you're relying on the sort of precedent that comes before them rather than the character himself.
Yeah.
I think that's what I loved about all sort of previous companions and stuff. Like, I love how they had their own merit and stuff. But then Clara was probably my least favourite companion still to this day, because they sort of ingrained her as so special in every single sense, in that she chose the TARDIS, she was there, she saved the Doctor from this, that and the other, she is the impossible girl, and also she's... I don't know, they sort of ingrained her way too far in the lore that it kind of really, that character becomes so unspecial. Whereas previous companions, I like how, like with Martha, like her sort of strongest bits in season 3 were where she sort of uses her actual medical training. Donna, she's like, she checks the clerical work.
Yeah, she checks the HR records when they go to the Sontaran place, and is like, there is nothing here. This is fishy, because you'd expect at least one of these guys to have gone off sick. Yeah. And that's really good.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that you got to play to a certain... Because that's the thing, real people have only a certain amount of skill sets, really. You can't just have them all. And I think that was a massive problem with a lot of Moffat's characters, specifically a lot of Moffat's female characters, with that he would just tick every single box when it came to like choosing character traits.
Yeah, it's a bit... Because the thing is, Doctor Who has never been strongly in the camp of science fiction or science fantasy. So as a result, you get kind of Chibnall, who leans very hard into science fiction, as in there's a lot of explaining, and it's a lot of, okay, this is related to this real-world thing, and this is related to this real-world thing. And then you have Moffat, who leans really hard into the fantasy, which is like, it doesn't matter, it doesn't make sense. Just, I don't know, it works. Shut up.
How did I get the cup of tea? That's the real question.
Yeah, and then, well, by that series, he was starting to use opportunities like that just to, like, make fun of his audience.
Well, Moffat
like,
loved
how
that,
did I
didn't
get the cup of tea? Well, screw off. I don't need to explain anything to you.
That was during that sort of Sherlock era, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say Yeah, we're both thinking of the same video now, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah, I hated that. Was a low point in Doctor Who for me. But we have to, of course, talk about what a lot of people are now seeing as the game-breaking element in Doctor Who, which is the Timeless Child. Do you think, because Chibnall was clearly quite reactionary, hence why Season 1 had no returning villains in it, and then season 2 turned it up to 100. Do you think, based on the reaction of the Timeless Child, it could be retconned?
I wouldn't be surprised, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it's not Chibnall that retcons it, if it ends up being retconned down the line. But I'm just disappointed because it would have made more sense for the Master to be the Timeless Child.
Yes.
In all that build-up, and, you know, the drumming and everything like that, and all the interest, the Time Lords, and, like, the interest the Time Lords put in the Master, because it kind of implied that the Doctor was kind of just a side person until he buggered off and stole the TARDIS. If the Master had been... and that would have still made him justifiably angry enough to, like, do his revenge, because it's
because
like,
they've experimented on him.
Yeah, they've experimented on
exactly.
me. They used me. They've wiped my memory more times than I can remember. Maybe better dialogue than that, but...
I think that would also explain... that wouldn't just do that, but it would also wrap up the kind of... because we follow the Doctor the whole way through, whereas the Master we lose track of various times. Like, he's obviously John Sim for a while, because he comes back with the goatee and everything, and then he's Missy at some point. But we don't see those regenerations, and they end up both killing each other. That could be the end of the Master. And this new iteration...
still, yeah.
This new iteration could be a version from... he could be like thousands of regenerations earlier, because if he's the Timeless Child, we know that there are endless Masters out there. Because he's got an unlimited regeneration cycle. So it would have helped clarify why we didn't... like, because that wasn't even wrapped up, like the end of Missy and John Sim's Master.
Yeah, it wasn't really clarified, was it? It was just like, oh no, the Master's back.
So I think if the Master was the Timeless Child, that would have answered that question as well, and said like, oh well, this is why the Master pops up and he never dies, because there are thousands of previous regenerations of him.
And I still don't think that takes away from the fact that obviously the character they met in the middle of the series was another incarnation of the Doctor. You could have just concluded that maybe, like, she's so far removed they've maybe forgotten about each other, kind of thing. That would... I would have been... they would have been a big pill to swallow, but I would have swallowed it. But the idea that actually there's been like thousands of Doctors, we've just not seen them, is a bit of oh, okay.
Yeah. Do you remember there was a controversy when they added one Doctor for like John Hurt, because then they were like, oh well, now that David Tennant's not technically the 10th Doctor, and that's ruining it.
Yeah.
Now it's David Tennant's probably the 10,000th Doctor or something.
Yeah, and again, it takes away from the origin story of being like the person who stole a TARDIS and ran away.
Yeah.
To being the mythical, all-powerful, original Time Lord that was destined to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah. And, yeah. I think unless, do you want to talk any more about... We haven't gone that in detail, sort of episode by episode, but like I think generally we've kind of explained our views on...
Yeah,
on
I think we've been quite
eras.
clear on the 3 eras. If you do want to see us talk more in detail, like, Doctor Who content is definitely something that me and Nick would sit down and happily do.
Yeah.
So at Holoprojectors, and outline exactly what you want, and or comment in the YouTube video, because this discussion will be on YouTube as well.
Yeah.
And just say what you want us to talk about regarding Doctor Who.
I just want to briefly mention as well, one of my problems with the Chibnall era is like I don't think the companions... You know how I was saying earlier how like David Tennant had the perfect sort of trio in that he had the love interest, the rebound, the friend kind of thing. I feel the problem with maybe these companions is, as much as I like them and they're better written than Moffat's companions, arguably, in that they sort of talk like real people, I think they haven't really had development, and they haven't really sort of had story arcs of their own.
The problem is there's 3 of them, really.
Yeah, which makes it difficult. But you know, I think they in like Jodie Whittaker's first season, I think they briefly hint towards a sort of romance between Yaz and the Doctor, and like, you know, follow that up. Don't just sort of say it offhand. You know, I'd quite like to see some like relationships bond or form between them, and how that affects the group and this, that, and the other. I think that would be interesting.
Well, supposedly there's rumours that after the Christmas special, it will just be Yaz as a companion, but that's unconfirmed.
Right, okay.
And maybe that is in reaction, because the thing is, I think all 3 are good companions, but none of them really get room to breathe. I think the bits where they do, what with the whole granddad stuff, and
Hmm.
obviously his difficult relationship with his own parents. I'm trying to remember what the character's called. But I'm only thinking,
Ryan?
Ryan, yeah, because I was only thinking of the actor's name. Like Ryan's relationship with his mum and his dad, and obviously granddad and stuff like that. That was all really interesting, but it wasn't very much.
No,
it
wasn't.
got like one or two episodes focus, and that was it.
Yeah. I'd like to see a bit more like sort of arcs in each of them. Going forward then, so thinking about the sort of the 60th anniversary or even sort of the next, because by then we might be in a new era again, who knows, or at least a new doctor.
Well, we'll most likely be in a new Doctor, because I think if Jodie Whittaker is still at the mantle at the 60th, she'll be the longest serving Doctor.
Yeah, it's more than likely we'll get a new Doctor, or if not a new era, a new writer as well. Who knows? Yeah, what would you want to see?
I would want another multi-Doctor story, because call me a very stereotypical Doctor Who fan. I just think they're fun.
Yeah.
I think obviously now you've got a new actor for the first Doctor that did obviously one with Peter Capaldi. I want to say David Bradley.
Yeah.
Yep. You could have the 1st, the 8th, the 9th probably won't come back, so the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, and the 14th. You could make a special called the 7 Doctors.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's just how they named the specials back in the old era of Who, wasn't it? They
had
the 2 Doctors, the 3 Doctors, the 5 Doctors, and just some kind of shenanigans that involves them all. And I don't want it to be very heavy or very serious. It could be some kind of really campy villain. Just 90 minutes of all the Doctors like bouncing off each other.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think like the 50th you had to do something epic, hence the whole Time Lord story and everything. But I think a 60th isn't a big enough of a milestone where you have to do that. So yeah, I'd agree with that. Just a sort of small story. I think I'm probably more interested in where the next generation takes us, because I almost want them to do a little bit of a time gap again, because then I think you can sort of breathe and sort of refresh and sort of have some events have already happened.
So by time gap, do you mean in the broadcast, or do you just mean like, the Doctor's now a few hundred years older?
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, I mean so in canon a sort of time gap, because I think what was genius about the revival of Doctor Who was you had the Time War, and I think something like The Timeless Child, I think might have been potentially a more interesting twist and a more swallowable twist if it maybe happened between season 11 and 12, if you see what I mean. Just because, I don't know, you can have something that affects how the Doctor acts, and then you sort of gradually unravel what happened.
So the Doctor shows up acting different, and you're like,
yeah,
what's happened between seasons, and then you're shown maybe through flashbacks. Obviously, the Master revealed this.
Because I think that was the genius of Russell T's era, wasn't it? In that each companion was able to sort of unravel another layer, and you go from a very dark portrayal in season 1 to a sort of pretty much happy-go-lucky Doctor in season sort of 4.
Yeah.
And then it even goes back and forth again, because then he sees himself as the winner in the specials. Yeah, I think I think doing a bit of a time gap sort of makes it interesting as to sort of where you're picking up the characters. And yeah, I don't know. I think like that was what interested me about Peter Capaldi's series with Bill. In that, I think it was called The Pilot, wasn't it?
Yeah, because the whole idea was after well, it wasn't even his first series as a Doctor, was it? They just felt like, we're going to give it a bit of a fresh take.
Yeah, which I enjoyed a lot, actually, and it felt like there'd been a bit of time, and it felt like we're in a new era. And I enjoyed that series a lot, actually. That was probably one of my favourite Moffat series.
Yeah.
The Bill one, because it simplified things, but it also sort of established and
things had happened, because you had obviously the Master was in the Doctor's custody. How did that happen? Like,
yeah, exactly, yeah, stuff like that. I think maybe even if it's for the next generation of Who, or whether it's just before now and the next Jodie Whittaker series, I think a time jump would make things really interesting. But yeah, no, for the 60th, I'd love to see another multi-Doctor story. That's probably the only real answer we can give, isn't it?
Yeah, I was interested, but I did suspect that what that would boil down to is I want to see a load of past Doctors interact.
Yeah.
Because that's what the specials are about, in my mind.
Yeah, totally.